Hey, friends, welcome back to yet another exciting episode of Friends of the Squared Circle. I'm your host, Crander Q, aka my real name, the number one beard in professional wrestling podcast. Now, Ian, that's a self proclaimed title, so no one can take it away from me. Joe Monroe, Tanner Tell 5 Wrestling with those second place beards. Now, we have a special guest joining us today. Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Crander Q. You said special guest, so I was tempted to look around to see who you might have been talking about. But if you mean me, then it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
I'm excited. We were talking off camera for a hot minute. You got a lot of tricks up your sleeve that I discovered pre-interview. I'm hoping he brags as much as he did to me off camera, folks. Now we're going to dive into your wrestling fandom. Let's dive into that first earliest wrestling memory you have.
First wrestling memory I have is seeing Macho Man Randy Savage crush people by flattening them with the elbow off the top rope. I missed a lot of people's first favorite wrestler was Hulk Hogan. And when you get into the history of it, you discover that a lot of that was leveraged off of his Rocky III appearance and the popularity of the Rocky franchise. I missed all of that. I hadn't seen any of the Rocky movies. I hadn't seen the rise of Hulkamania. So in comparison, all I saw was this really entertaining, scrappy guy wearing the sequin robes with a beautiful manager, carrying around a championship belt and leaping all over the place. And that's the guy who resonated with me. And so in the dichotomy of Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania, and Macho Madness, I was always on the side of Randy Savage, whether he was a babyface or a heel. I didn't get how so many normal-sized people or relatively normal-sized people could identify with this guy who was 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", whatever he really was. And I met Hulk Hogan in real life a few years ago, and he's still a mammoth-sized man, no matter how old he is. But I didn't understand how people could identify with this guy when his opponents, many of them, and especially the one that I was interested in, was just appeared to be working so much harder to topple a much larger opponent. In my life, growing up until that point, you were always supposed to identify with the scrappy, plucky underdog, and no matter who the fans were cheering for, I always looked at the smaller guy and said, "Wow, like he's really, really working hard trying to take out the immovable object. That's the guy I want to be like, and that's the guy I'd want to emulate." And so I was a Randy Savage guy, 100%.
That's great. And you mentioned the underdog. We talked about that in a previous episode with Ref Rosie, how Darby Allin going against say someone like the Big Show, it's unbelievable, but you're rooting for that smaller statured guy because he has to overcome that challenge. And for me, when it comes to that stuff, I was always the one that didn't want to jump on bandwagons or be like everyone else. So was like, well, everybody likes this person, so I have to be different. And that's kind of how I resonated towards Goldust and Mankind, because they were different. And it was like, oh, well, they probably don't have a lot of fans. I want to be their fan, which I'm sure they had hundreds and thousands of fans back then too. But I felt like, oh, I have to be a fan of them. Just like with my family being Packer fans, I didn't want to be like everybody else. So I had to be different because growing up, I was the only one with glasses. I was the chunky kid, and now as I'm getting older, my family, they're all getting glasses, kind of morphing into what I look like. And it's just kind of funny that it's coming full circle that now I'm not the oddball looking, like my sister's the oddball looking one. So shout out to my sister. But yeah, that's great. Like Macho Man, he's usually one of the few that a lot of people resonate to, especially because of his promos. The Macho Man, and my buddy and them had their wedding, and that was one of the things his wife did was she had me hide creamers all over, and he couldn't figure out what the hell was going on the whole wedding day. Like,
The
I keep
cream always
finding these
rises to the
creamers.
top. Yeah.
Yep, and then we did this whole grand march thing where we all came out to entrances of different wrestlers. I told you off camera that I'm an Otis fan, so I had to come out with the Money in the Bank briefcase. Oh yeah, so uh, yeah, I understand always liking someone that wasn't the marquee, but as you're getting older, did you gravitate towards anyone else besides Macho Man, or was that your ride or die?
Oh, I never really fell off the Randy Savage bandwagon until he became he started to get more immobile.
Okay.
When he started to lose some of that mobility, and then I mean I'm going to be embarrassed to say it now. I mean, certainly Kurt Angle, but I was a big Chris Benoit fan.
Okay.
Unfortunately, he who shall not be named.
We talk about the wrestling, not the care or the personal person. So a lot of people always tell me like, why do you always bring him up? Well, he was a great wrestler. People loved him, but we don't appreciate what he did outside of the ring. So it's fine.
Yeah. Retroactively, when I really started getting into All Japan Pro Wrestling, I retroactively became a huge Jumbo Tsuruta fan.
Okay.
Just especially during when he was taking out the Over Generation Army, when he was taking out Misawa, Kawada, Kobashi, and Taue, or not Taue, but Misawa, Kawada, Kobashi, and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi as they were on the come up and flattening all of them, just being the surly old guy. I thought that stuff was just tremendous. So yeah, and Eddie Guerrero too in his Jeet Steel era. But yeah, those were my guys.
Yeah, Eddie. Yeah, oh man, I get emotional with Eddie. I just loved him. And then as he progressed, he just kept getting better. But how did you discover, like the New Japan wrestling stuff? Now, I'm sure you're around the same age as me, not to age you here. But
Almost 46.
Okay. Oh, you're a little bit older than me. I'm turning 40 this year. Oh boy, scary. Did you find it through VHS tapes? Now, kids, that's the thing that we had to put into the VCR. That's a whole other contraption that would play movies, not discs or streaming services. If you're a youngin watching this, but did you find it through tape trading, magazines? The internet was just starting back then. It always makes me laugh that I said that I was part of that when that was really taking off. But how did you find that?
I think if you were I hate that I'm now in the generation that says they're dating themselves, but I think if you started watching in my era, you had the people who would sort of trickle in and out, and you were aware that wrestling was occurring in Japan. For instance, if you were around during enough of the mid 80s, strictly watching WWF, you saw the Jumping Bomb Angels, and you also had the Crush Girls who were there for a moment, and you got the suspicion just watching what they did, like, pro wrestling might actually be better over there than it is here. Just seeing the innovations that they were bringing out during the brief periods of time they spent in the ring for WWF in the mid 80s. But you would also see you also had the Great Muta, obviously. You had Keiji Muto come in to WCW, and then you had Jushin Thunder Liger showing up and doing his series with Flying Brian Pillman. And then you had the interpromotional stuff that was going on with WCW and New Japan when Tatsumi Fujinami was coming in to have his matches with Ric Flair, and Masahiro Chono was coming in to have his matches with Rick Rude, and Kensuke Sasaki was coming in to have his matches with Rick Rude and some others. And so you got a taste for what was happening over there. And you'd also hear that guys like they'd bring in Dr. Death Steve Williams, and they'd bring in Terry Gordy, but they'd have them dressed in their kimonos and saying, yeah, they're champions over in Japan. Okay. Maybe I should check that out. But it wasn't, to your point, it wasn't until the tape trading era where I would get on primarily DeathValleyDriver.com
Okay.
with now my buddy, thanks to my writing experiences, Phil Schneider, who's running that along with Dean. I would see their lists of recommendations, and then I'd go right out and purchase the tapes, primarily from highspots.com, but from a few other places as well.
Okay.
And then just devour all of that stuff. So between 1997 and probably 2005, anytime I had $10 to spare, it probably went to highspots.com.
That's great. I remember getting Mick Foley's death match. I'm not sure who he wrestled, but I remember a buddy had that on VHS tape that he had. And this was before the streaming services, probably, 2008, so it's still not very accessible. Like, you could find clips and stuff on YouTube, but like he had like that whole pay-per-view or that whole show on there, and then he just fast forwarded to the part where it was so that I could watch it. But it just makes me laugh because I used to go, and we didn't really have the internet until I was like in middle school or high school. I would go to Shopko or Kmart and look at the magazines, and they're like, who's the top 10? Oh, well, that guy's at the top. He must be really good. So then when I would go to school, I would try to look them up through the wrestling web pages and stuff. And this is going to nerd me out here, is I used to make a lot of PowerPoints when I was a kid. And I would do like, Hulk Hogan, and then I would put a bunch of pictures of Hulk Hogan, and then have the PowerPoint do all these weird slide things. And then the next page would be like, your Macho Man. And then I'd always try to search out those wrestlers that I, didn't know or that I wanted to know because they were in the top 10 for some reason. And I always got mad if, like, say, the Steiners or the Giant weren't in those top 10s. And I was just like, well, they're really good. I watch them all the time on WCW. Why are they not in the top 10? And the only other thing I had at that time was video games. And when I first played them at a friend's house, he had the action figures and the video games. And I'm like, this is cool. And then I didn't realize it was actually on TV till he had told me, yeah, it's actually on TV. I just thought it was characters like Ninja Turtles that they just came up with because, you had the cop, you had the Mountie and the Undertaker, it's like, these are made up characters, but who knew that it was actually on TV till I finally discovered it. And it was Yokozuna getting, I think, hauled out on a forklift or some type of power truck. And my brother's like, oh, this stuff is fake, right? And I'm all upset with him because he's making fun of me, so.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the characters. So you were watching during the era of when IRS was wrestling as well?
Yep.
Yeah. And Steve Kern, when he was wrestling as Skinner, I've had conversations with both of them about their alligator hunter and taxman gimmicks. Sorry, he's my friend. I got to stop. I got to not call him Mike. In Rotunda, it feels so weird. Okay, in Rotunda's case, he goes in there and Vince hands him the IRS gimmick, except this version had brown spandex tights, so they look like lederhosen, and it eventually evolved into the look that it would become. But the way he was explaining it to me was that it was all about attempting to first appeal to fans in the toy aisle, more so the parents of kids in the toy aisle, that they don't know who Mike Rotunda is, but they get that this is IRS the tax man. They don't know who Steve Kern is, but they know that this is an alligator hunter. And they don't know who Ray Traylor is, but they can see that this is a corrections officer. So that if parents are out randomly buying figures for their kids. They don't need to have watched wrestling ever in order to identify that this is the type of character this is. And maybe my son wants to do some play acting where the police officer beats up the alligator hunter.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I mean, it was smart back in the day. If you look at turtles, you can see him behind me. I'm a Ninja Turtle guy.
An Eastman and Laird guy.
What's that?
An Eastman and Laird guy.
Oh yeah. I just remember like every time we went there was something new. Like I had the sailor, Michelangelo, and then I had the astronaut, So like I totally get it. I've never looked at it as the toy perspective like you just brought up. And now, in that era of Shikara out of Chicago, like, you have the Fire Ants. We bring up our local guy, Super Atomic Thunder Frog, that I almost name drop every episode because it's, a fun character that's going to resonate with people. And I've got a few other wrestlers that I talk to that Mikey the Cheese Pro Wrestler. And it's just great to see them doing something different to get eyes on them, so yeah.
I was 8 or 9 when the Ninja Turtles first surged to popularity, and I'm sure there were people. I'm sure I had classmates who didn't necessarily care about the Turtles, but they were definitely fans of Friday the 13th and Jason, even though they're little kids and they shouldn't have been watching that anyway. But they definitely liked Jason, and so when they saw the Casey Jones figure in the toy aisle and they saw the hockey mask, that they were like, okay, I don't care about these turtles, but that guy is cool. They're never going to make a Jason action figure. Like, little did we know.
Yeah, right. Everything's got an action figure practically now. So.
Exactly. But I can get Casey Jones, and he can be a Jason analog, and he can slap some people around during my playtime.
One of my favorite things was to get the American Gladiators ones, because they would hold on to the ropes and I could sling them back and they would fly off and tackle my wrestlers. And I had 2 of them. I believe they were Nitro. So they were like my little tag team. And one tag team that I love, we talked about it off episode, was, Brian Blair and Jumpin' Jim Brownsell, the Killer Bees. I thought that was the coolest thing ever when they would put on the hoods, and then roll in and out of the ring. I know it's silly to some people, but I thought it was great. And then when the Bella twins did that as well, folks, I thought that was like the greatest thing ever. I know the Bellas get a lot of hate. Oh, not fair. Not fair. Ian pulling out. Oh, my goodness. That's not fair. Not fair now that you got your headphones back in. I am so jealous of that.
Hey man, I've spent enough nights at the Blair family home. I should have a signed Killer Bee mask somewhere.
Oh man, I always thought that was so cool and creative. Like I said, the Bellas did that. They got a little bit of hate. I know they're not the favorite in the wrestling community, but they, just like people before them, opened doors for women. Like I told you off camera, I just finished their biography. But let's segue into that. Let's talk about what you do on the side there when it comes to hanging out with not only, one of the Killer Bees, but other wrestlers you've hung out with.
I was about to say, I also have a signed piece of an alligator spine somewhere around here that was signed.
Stop it. You got to send me a picture of that later. That is hilarious.
I'll find it. I honestly don't know where it is. So around 2016 is when I first made the acquaintance of Dan Severn, and he mentioned to me, I was interviewing him for something else for the state games of Michigan, and Dan mentioned to me that one day he wanted to work on a book. And he was so profusive with his words when we were speaking. I only needed him for 15 to 20 minutes, and he wound up talking to me for an hour and a half. And I figured, like, if he has this kind of time on his hands, that he can afford to waste an hour and a half talking to me. If we got in 14 or so sessions like this, he'd have a book's worth of content there. And so it was later on that he brought up that he wanted to work on a book, and I didn't hesitate. I said, well, if you give me 2 weeks worth of your time at about an hour and a half at a clip, I think we can get a book out for you. And that's how his autobiography, realist guy in the room, the life and times of Dan the Beast Severn, got produced and released. And that was my first crack at writing a wrestling book. Now, I did have a writing and reporting background. I was a former new media producer for ABC News in the Metro Detroit area. I was an NBC News reporter in Flint, Michigan. My degrees, my worthless communications degree from the University of Michigan, and my master's degree in editorial journalism from Northwestern University. So yeah, I had a news background. I had a writing background. I hadn't been on the air for a while or doing much in the way of reporting, but I'd been doing a fair amount of writing. And so when that opportunity with Dan came up, I mean, I'm typically the type of guy who writes 1,000 words a day, no matter what,
nice.
just because. If I don't have something I'm working on, I'll invent a reason to write something that's 1,000 words a day.
There you go.
We just sort of plugged that into the processes that were already underway, and got that book released. But you mentioned off the air that you were a fan of the Hornswoggle book.
Yes, yep, that is my favorite one to talk about every time I'm on this podcast. So
yeah, you were a fan of that book. Life is short, and so am I. So my then girlfriend, now wife, was living in DC, and I was visiting her, but also hanging out at an Airbnb in Virginia. I mean, really, I was hanging out at Airbnbs in Virginia for 3 weeks. So the first 2 weeks of that is when I was recording with Severn. And the day we wrapped on recording, I hadn't been to the gym. I usually work out every single day. I hadn't been to the gym in 2 weeks. I was like, man, I need to break this lull. So I went to the gym. I got on the elliptical. I popped on Steve Austin's podcast, and Hornswoggle was the guest, and he was telling stories like that his indie wrestling name was Short Stack, the man, the myth, the midget. I was laughing so hard on the elliptical, and I went home, found his email, sent him an email, and said, I just heard you on Austin. I thought you were hilarious. You need a book. I'm working on Dan Severn's book right now, but if you're interested, I would love to help you with that. I hopped in the shower. I hopped out of the shower. He'd already replied and said, yep, let's do this. So 1 week later, started recording with him started recording with him for his autobiography. So that's how that got started, and that's back in 2016 for both of those projects.
That is so cool. And with Hornswoggle, he's a Wisconsin boy, so that's another reason I like him. He runs a promotion, that's 6 hours away now, but one of the stories that I really loved, he actually brought it up on Taker's podcast, was he was playing Tommy Ball with obviously Tommy Dreamer. If you don't want to know what that is, get the book, read it. It's a little weird. And I brought him some tennis balls to sign, or not sign, but give him. And I made a little graphic. It was just bootleg as hell of just Tommy Dreamer in ECW South Park form, and put Tommy balls on it. He laughed so hard at that. And I told him how much I loved the book. He signed it for free. He gave me a picture for free and an 8x10 for free, because he had never received tennis balls. And he thought that was the greatest thing ever. And then the other story I really like in that is when they were playing it overseas and they didn't have any tennis balls, which I'm sure you already know this story, is that Fit Finley threw them into the crowd, and he was losing his mind because he spent so much money on those tennis balls. I was laughing reading that chapter, going, I would lose my ever loving mind after spending that much money on tennis balls. And here's my coworker. You know, so yeah, I that was probably one of my favorite parts of that book is just him losing his mind over, good old Fit Finley throwing his tennis balls into the crowd. So
Yeah,
but
in the grand scheme of pro wrestling ribs, that's one of the most harmless ones I've ever heard.
yep, and how he fell asleep. Yeah, I swear by this book, like I'm not just blowing smoke up his butt, peoples. I talk about this book more than any other book on my podcast. It is my go-to to recommend to people because that was a fun one. It gives you definitely perspective of what he went through that most people don't go through in the wrestling business. And I would love to see a follow up with him running his promotion, as well as, finally getting invited back to do autograph signings for WWE at WrestleMania. This was the first year, I think, after so long that they finally got a hold of him. I think he deserves the Hall of Fame for what he's contributed. Now, granted, he didn't win title after title, but, I stand on that. And then, yeah, a great book. And like I said, I didn't know I had the author on till today.
Let's
Uh,
that's actually part of my progression in my story.
yeah,
And by the way, when I meet people from Wisconsin, and I haven't spent any serious time in Wisconsin in my life, but when I mention Hornswoggle and mention Fox Valley, and I
mhm,
mentioned he was working at the Target, and when he got upgraded to his status as a WWE wrestler,
mhm,
um, and they're able to say, "Yeah, I know the Target. I've been to that Target."
yeah,
I always think that's pretty cool. Um, but yeah, when I submitted that book, I didn't know. I'll admit, I didn't really know what I was doing.
mhm,
And with the whole thing, like when you get into writing, you'll see a bunch of advice from a bunch of different people on on how you should go about making your way through the industry.
right,
And one of the things that I'd been told, which turned out probably not to be the best advice in the world, is if you're going to be soliciting a major publisher and you're working on your book and it hasn't been pre-approved, like you should probably leave it in kind of a very rough draft form.
mhm,
You don't need to have everything completely ironed out. They'll probably want to make some changes. They'll want to chop things down. They'll want to cut things out completely. And so when I found a literary agent for him,
mhm,
and they took control of the book and they started shopping it around, one of the first things they said was, okay, well, we're going to get it to a publisher, but that publisher is probably going to want to take your name off the book and reassign their own editor slash ghostwriter to get their and get their name on the project. But since you already have a contract that guarantees that you're going to get paid a percentage,
mhm,
then that's going to be what you reap from this project. And I was at a point, and I remain at this point in most cases, but I was at a point where I would have rather, it was worth more to me to have my name on the project
mhm,
than for me to get any financial compensation for having worked on the book.
right,
Um, but anyway, I mean, just so you understand the timeline, again, Dylan and I started working on that in 2016. Um, in We were done in 2017. We handed it off to a literary agent. ECW Press decided to pick it up, but they wanted a lot of changes made, and they handed it off to Ross Owen Williams, who is a fantastic writer and a good friend of mine. I don't have
mhm,
a single negative thing to say about the guy. Um, but Ross is the guy who said, no, you have to leave Ian's name on the book. He submitted a completed book. So we're not taking him off. So he made extensive edits to the book, like
Mm-hmm.
essentially pretty much wrote a brand new version, but my name was still on it. So having learned from that process, Kenny Casanova, who is a great friend of mine who's written a lot of wonderful wrestling books, some of which you own. Kenny, in the meantime, handed me an opportunity to write Bugsy McGraw's autobiography,
Mm-hmm.
which Kenny, I think, was working on Sabu's. He was working on Vader's. He was working on Beefcakes. He was working on a bunch of people's. He didn't have time. He asked me if I was interested, and I said, sure, because I just wanted the opportunity to take an independent book project from start to finish, do all my own formatting, do all the formatting with the photos, and really see if I could put a project out on my own that was representative of what I could do without any sort of interference. And so Brute Power, Bugsy's autobiography, got released in 2019. And Hornswoggle's book finally got released in September of 2019.
Okay.
So the takeaway from that should be, I start working on Hornswoggle's book in 2016. It's handed off to a publisher in 2017, and it's completely out of my hands. I start working on Bugsy's book at the beginning of 2018. I release it in 2019, and so it beats the Hornswoggle book to publication by something like 8 or 9 months.
Oh, okay.
And after all that, Bugsy's book is the one that becomes a finalist for Wrestling Observer Book of the Year for 2019, and not Hornswoggle's book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I considered that to be somewhat redemptive.
Gotcha.
That the two books get released the same year, and the one that I had total control over wound up being the one that performed better in the Observer Awards.
Gotcha. Nice little shot there. But yeah.
It's not intended to be a shot at all.
I thought because they took it away from you there. Sorry.
No, I think the finish. Look, Life is Short and So Am I is the only book that my name has ever been on that's been sold in major retailers, including Borders and Barnes and Noble.
My bad.
So I'm thrilled that book got released, that I had some involvement in it, in its initial creation and getting it on shelves. And Ross did an incredible job, because Ross is an incredible writer. I just think it's cool that when it was all said and done, that Brute Power outperformed it critically with the Observer crowd specifically. Okay. And that gave me a lot of confidence going forward that, I kind of know what I'm doing now, and I can bring that into future projects.
Gotcha. My bad. No, my some apologies there. I thought you were celebrating that you the one that you did all on your own there. So, were you able to like hang out with any of the wrestlers in person, or was it more over the phone, or via Skype or Zoom, whatever it may be nowadays?
Every conversation I had with Swoggle was over the phone.
Okay.
Every conversation I had with Severn, for the most part, was over the phone, but Severn is from my home state of Michigan. Okay. So I was able to drive over to Coldwater.
Nice.
I don't know if you ever watched not many people did watch it, but the reality series Dark Horse Nation, about the Dark Horse Brewery in Marshall, Michigan. So my second cousin, Christy Morse, was one of the owners of the Dark Horse Brewery, and that is only about a half an hour north of Coldwater. So I was able to drive over there, stop off at the brewery, say hi to my family members, and then turn straight south for Coldwater and drive over to Severn's facility, hang out with him, observe him teaching a wrestling class, scan all of his photos, and put the finishing touches on the book right there. So, I was able to hang out with him, spent plenty of time hanging out with Brian Blair later on, spent tons of time hanging out with Steve Kern later on.
Nice.
And even though I don't have a book out with him, spent the night at Mike Rotunda's house with he and his wife, Stephanie Wyndham Rotunda, and Barry Wyndham, who lives down the street.
Nice.
He came over and hung out while I was there too, which, yeah, that was a lot of, if you were ever a wrestling fan, like you try not to turn into a mark in these situations, but yeah, that 10-year-old me would have thought that was the coolest thing in the world, and 40-something-year-old me didn't think it was too bad either.
Yeah, I like Barry Windham a lot as a kid too, and then you know, like you said, not to mark out in the presence of them. You know, I try to remember sometimes that they are, you know, human as well. Dustin, I told him I was nervous 9 times. That's another story I tell all the time. But when I met Dan, I was kind of intimidated after reading his book, because he comes across on the pages like, you know, no nonsense. And I just remember talking to him, and his wife's like, well, did you tell him about your book? And he's like, oh, he already had it, you know, because normally I'll search up to see if they have one before I go to shows and stuff. And, you know, when he said the line in there about how, like, if he didn't like something, how he would beat the shit out of the wrestlers, I was like, whoa, that's a man's man right there. Like, if I don't like what they want to do to me, you know, so yeah, that was another one that was pretty fun to read, you know, so.
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of people in the wrestling business who, even to this day, who could make Dan Severn do something that he doesn't want to do.
Yeah, yep. And I didn't realize before that he was such a collegiate wrestler, you know, and that's why I love these books so much, is that you get to dive into more than just them in the squared circle. You get to find out about their family. You get to find out about, you know, their personal issues and, you know, their personal growth. You know, it always baffles me, like I told you off camera, how us fans will say comments and then you don't realize what that person is going through, just like in society today. Excuse me, what they're going through, but yet we can sit there on the internet and say, oh, they're being buried, they're not being used correctly, or they suck, or did you see their botches? But then you're reading these books and you understand, oh, I can see why they had an off night, you know, especially Soraya's chapter 4. I mean, that one, I'll admit it right here on the internet. I've told people at work, I almost started crying reading about what she went through and her brother went through in the early days, and how her brother, you know, took the abuse for her. And I was like, oh, you know, like that's, you know, that girl has been through some stuff, you know. And if people read that book, they would probably realize, wow, she has been through the ringer and has come out on top. Maybe not the most perfect way, but she's grinding every day to be the best person she can be. And, you know, it just sucks that when I read comments, every comments about her videos, it's like, are we really 5 years old? We got to bring that up every time. Imagine you making a mistake or making something that has to haunt you for the rest of your life, because that's what people think is funny. And I will commend, she had an appearance somewhere. I can't remember the exact name of it. And people are like, oh, I can't wait to bring her videos in and get them signed. And I literally tagged the company. It's like, looks like you got a lot of weirdos and creepers. And they put out a thing like, said, you will be blocked. And if we find out you try to come, you will be not allowed because of your comments. And I was like, you know, like, it's just, people got to realize that people are human, you know, and it's just stupid that they keep going back to that one incident in her life, you know, and it just, after reading that, I have a newfound respect for her and how she's been able to overcome it. So,
yeah. Wrestling fans can be, some wrestling fans can be incredibly mean-spirited.
Yep.
And in a way that, I guess in my experience, that most people who are fans of most other things aren't.
Yep.
And maybe it has to do with the subjective make-believe nature of pro wrestling. Like Steve Kern likes to say, like, pro wrestling is an opinion. Nothing about it is either right or wrong. It's just subject to the whims of whoever is running it.
Right.
But wrestling fans get so upset over certain things not going their way, or the
Yep.
people that they would push if they were in charge not being pushed to the extent or degree that they would want to see
Yep.
them pushed. And they'll start taking it out on the wrestlers
Yep.
who, for all intents and purposes, are actors playing characters.
Yep.
And they want to see the downfall of the real person. And
Mhm.
it's just unfortunate that some people's lives are so sad that on the rare occasions when they actually get to interact with pro wrestlers, who are people who have taken the initiative and made the sacrifices to
Yep.
try to better their lives and live out their dreams, that you have to tear down those people. And
Yep.
I just think it's pretty disgusting.
Yeah, especially most recently with Charlotte Flair. Yeah, she wins all the time. I'm sick of it. Blah blah blah, and it just makes me think. As soon as Rhea gets to that level of multiple championships, she's going to be the next one they're getting sick of. Everybody loved Becky. Now they're sick of Becky. Apparently, it's just like and that's just you know calling the women there. Out. Unfortunately, it happens with the men too. I don't want to think that I'm just coming after the women, but it's just like we get so bored so quick nowadays that they expect the title run to be 2 months, and then the next hot commodity should have the title already. But it's just like relax, let it build, let it get to the next character. There's plenty of time for them to get the spotlight too. But like you said, as fans, we just want to see their downfall, and that's unfortunate. But before we wrap it up here, Ian, where can the people find you? And then any last plugs you got to do, and then we'll ask you one hard hitting question before we get you out of here.
Sure. You can find me on social media at Streamglass. It's right on the screen. You can find me on Twitter there. With respect to any of the books that I've worked on, you can find all of them on Amazon.com, including my most recent book. Let's see if we can get this through the screen filter at all. Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus: The Rise of Black American Wrestling,
All right.
with the foreword by Dave Meltzer, who was
Okay.
very generous and gave me, I think, 7 pages worth of a foreword because he was a big fan of the book once I sent it to him.
Very nice.
Also, if you're interested in professional wrestling in the Bahamas, we've got Bahamian Rhapsody, the unofficial history of pro wrestling's unofficial territory. I interviewed 40 different people about their experiences working in and wrestling in the Bahamas for that book. And also Brian Blair's book, the 2 autobiographies of Steve Kern, Bugsy McGraw's book, and we've also mentioned Life is Short and So Am I, and also Dan Severn's autobiography as well. If you'd like to see my other writings on wrestling, I am a contributing writer at TheRinger.com. My most recent piece was on Clarence Bolden, who is in all likelihood, the first Black professional wrestler to win a world championship. The only
Okay.
issue was nobody knew he was Black or half Black in his case, because his identity was masked. He wrestled Frank Gotch, who outweighed him by 30 pounds. And when the match was over, Frank Gotch went to the media and said if Clarence Bolden was 30 pounds heavier, he would be the heavyweight champion of the world right now without question. So, yeah, the best pound-for-pound wrestler of the Pioneer era was Black. And, yeah, in the words of Frank Gotch, he was the best. That article on The Ringer is an excerpt from the new book that I have coming out next month, which is going to be called A Decided Novelty. And it is the essential guide to Black pro wrestling history from 1880 to 1950. Looks like
Nice.
it's going to be a 550-page book. And that was an instance where I had people telling me that I was the best Black pro wrestling author ever. And if that was true, then I didn't want, I mean, part of this is for myself. I didn't want people looking back at my tenure saying, okay, if he was that, but what does that mean? What would you have wanted that guy to do
Mm-hmm.
in order to make that mean something substantive? So I got to work. I've been working on this book for a year and a half. And once it's released, I will be able to walk away from wrestling writing at whatever point that occurs with a clear conscience.
That's
So
awesome.
anyway,
I'm gonna
that's
have to check out some more of those because I showed you my collection off camera. People have seen it. I'm excited for you. And I lied. I have two hard hitting questions now.
by
The
all
first
means.
one being, if you could write on any wrestler for a biography, you know my pick already. It's Double J. If you could pick any wrestler that you could write a book for, now it could already be out. That's fine too. But who would you pick? What wrestler would you pick to write a biography about?
Oh, living or dead?
Any wrestler, and like I said, if they've already got a book out, you're, you know, so you can spend time with that person too. Feel free to pick that one. You know what I mean? So this is
Auto,
your. Who would you like to have a book out? And then the second one, I hope, is a good question too.
autobiography would have been Randy Savage.
Okay. Nice.
But unfortunately, that won't happen. So all we're going to get on him, unfortunately, is biographies, independent biographies,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, unfortunately, that's a topic that has already been covered.
Gotcha.
So I won't be doing that. And I prefer to work on stuff that hasn't been done before.
Right.
The
That's what I love about the Dan Severn. You know, the Hornswoggle and the Brian Blair. It's like, they've got one book where everybody else has got 60. And that's the thing with action figures too. Side note before we get this last question in. We don't need 70 Hulk Hogan figures, Mattel. Give me a top flight. Give me, something that hasn't been done before or a character that hasn't been done before. Not these 25 Seth Rollins and, 40 CM Punks. I'm sure other fans will disagree with me, but give us something different. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, but yes, and to actually answer your question, a Tony Khan autobiography. I've interviewed him,
Oh,
but a
that'd be
Tony
a good one.
Khan
Yeah.
autobiography, that's actually a book that I would enjoy working on.
I bet he would love that, and then it would be great to kind of get the behind the scenes of these first 5 years for sure.
I
And
want to hear.
last,
I want to hear about his wrestling career. Like Tony
oh,
was a
okay,
guy who was on the message boards at DeathValleyDriver.com back in the
okay,
day. He had an extensive wrestling career. When I interviewed him before for The Ringer,
uh-huh.
in his view, like when he was writing wrestling, the name of his show was Dynamite. So
Nice,
in a lot of ways, he considers what he's doing right now to be an extension of the wrestling promotion that
very
he was
cool,
writing for 25 years ago.
very cool, very cool. And then lastly, I know that Dylan, aka Hornswoggle, has read his book for the audios. But if you could have any of your books read by anybody, now you already picked Macho Man, but we're going to keep this one for people that are alive. Who would you like to have read one of your books in an audio book format?
Karrion Kross.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I see he's got a new one coming out too, or he's got one coming out too. So,
Well, he's got a nice deep voice,
mm-hmm.
and I mean, who wasn't entertained by his Jesse the Body Ventura impression?
Yes,
I thought that
yep,
was phenomenal. So yeah,
yep.
if I had to pick anyone to read one of my books in an audio format that wasn't me,
Mm-hmm.
it would be Karrion Kross.
Very nice, very nice. All right, we'll wrap it up right here, Ian. We'll have to get you on for a second episode. We can dive more into these books or so. But if you want to be just like Ian and be on a future episode of Friends of the Squared Circle, hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and whatever else is out there. I'm sure we have it. We would love to get you on so you could be a friend of the Squared Circle. And it's just your boy, Crander Q. Crander Q out.